How's it going, everyone? I'm Town Cape, and today I'm here to tell you how the narrative and mechanics work together to convey the story of Middle-earth Shadows of Mordor. I'll be analyzing how the game explores Tolkien's themes through its characters, how the Nemesis System works with the game, and how the characters are portrayed through mechanics just as much as story. There will be spoilers, so if you haven't played this game, you may not want to watch this video. The biggest problem with making a story-driven Lord of the Rings game is how to incorporate Tolkien's main themes. Games, especially action-adventure games, have traditionally been about character empowerment, and this clashes with the primary themes of the Lord of the Rings. Empowerment is supposed to beacon evil. However, Tolkien's works were always set from the point of view of the heroes. What if instead they were set from the point of view of the villains? That's what Monolith sets out to do in this game. However, Talion isn't really evil. The truly evil one seems to be Celebrimbor. Throughout the game, we see that the Bright Lord Celebrimbor is basically no better than the Dark Lord Sauron. Celebrimbor is the one who deceives Talion into joining him in his quest for vengeance. He's the one who refuses to allow Talion to move on with his life and keeps him on his path for vengeance. Celebrimbor is basically Sauron taking advantage of an innocent man. The game demonstrates this in its mechanics just as much as its narrative. At the start, Talion is just an honorable ranger. However, as he completes quests with Celebrimbor, he slowly devolves into a terrifying phantom that strikes fear into the hearts of orcs. It's quite fitting for a lot of this gameplay to be lifted directly from the Batman Arkham games. Like Batman, Talion uses fear, but in the context of the Tolkien verse, using fear doesn't necessarily make one a hero. This idea is no better explored than through Celebrimbor's domination techniques. They act as an illusion to the dominating powers of Sauron's One Ring. Stealing the wills of orcs is what allows Talion to establish power in Mordor, but by the latter half of the game, Talion will be backstabbing the branded orcs who helped him just so he can get epic ruins. And that's not everything. As Talion gets to unlocking more of his tier 3, we witness just how dark some of his unlocked powers, like Brutalize and Death Threat, are. Now let's talk about the Nemesis System, which I believe almost perfectly fits into this game. There's been some criticism regarding the orcs generated by the Nemesis System. Some people consider their personalities to be a bit narrow, and they have a point. At their core, every single orc has the exact same personality. They're all barbarous thugs that are after power. There's no real moral and psychological complexity behind any of these orcs. Why did Monolith decide to have all the orcs designed this way? The most probable reason is because the AI just isn't advanced enough yet to randomly generate morally and psychologically complex personalities. However, I think that works to their advantage. Think about all the orcs you've seen in the books and films. Were any of them morally or psychologically complex? Of course not. They were no more than a bunch of barbarous thugs that wanted power. So while the Nemesis System is unable to produce incredibly deep personalities, the personalities it can produce are fit for an orc. Qualities like the thirst for power and barbarous behavior are really all you need to make a memorable orc character. That's why it makes sense for only orcs to be incorporated in the Nemesis System. Some people may dislike the Nemesis System for only implementing orcs, but at this point at least, I don't think the Nemesis System is fit for creating any of the other races. Humans are morally and psychologically complex. Elves are morally and psychologically complex. Dwarves are morally and psychologically complex. The Nemesis System is unable to create psychologically complex characters at this point, so it won't be able to do a good job of creating a society of humans, elves, or dwarves. However, if Shadow of Mordor does have one flaw, it's that its appeal depends too much on the Nemesis System. For example, you get to create your own dynamic story with the Nemesis System, but dynamic story barely interacts with the scripted story. I honestly think more could have been done to bring the two stories together. I mean, the war chiefs at the top of the Nemesis System were supposed to directly answer to the Black Captain, so perhaps they could have each had a different relationship with each Black Captain and provide different information about each captain to Talion. The disjointed scripted and dynamic stories is probably also the reason why the boss fights of this game just aren't that memorable. The Black Captains are evil humans, so they don't fit into the Nemesis System. So Monolith decided to take a more traditional approach with them, and their attempts were met with varying degrees of success. The thing about the Black Captains is that there is a lot of story behind them, a lot of story that isn't presented very well. Most players guys will probably agree that the best boss fight is with the hammer. The hammer is supposed to represent Sauron's strength, so an ideal fight with him would showcase what a powerful opponent he can be. However, the boss fight with him just feels a bit cheap. The only difference between the battle with the hammer and the battle with the warchief is that we're not given any intel on the hammer. This is probably a result of the scripted and dynamic story being separate and not working together. We're left in the dark, so we have to improvise and depend on luck to defeat the hammer. However, that doesn't really make him look like a powerful opponent, let alone a symbol to represent Sauron's strength. Defeating a boss that you have no intel on doesn't feel like you've conquered an opponent with great strength. It feels more like you've just gotten lucky. It would have been better if you were somehow able to gain intel on the hammer beforehand, but still had a hard time defeating him. That's what makes a difficult opponent. Even after preparing for him, you still have a tough time defeating him. The other Black Captains are even more anticlimactic. The tower represents Sauron's malice, and the battle with him does show the tower messing with Talion's head, but it relies a bit too much on quick time events and is just not interactive enough. The biggest problem is with the Black Hand. There isn't even a battle with the Black Hand. The Black Hand is supposed to represent Sauron's deceit, but the only deceit we see from him is how he keeps deceiving the player into thinking that he's going to get to fight him. We first think he's going to face Talion for destroying the monument, but the hammer comes instead. We then think he's going to be across the sea, but instead we find the tower. When we finally get to him, he decides to kill himself and leaves us with a quick time event Sauron. There are so many other ways that Sauron's deceit could have been portrayed. They could have had the Black Hand masquerade as an orc warchief or something along those lines. So much more could have been done. Now let's talk about the other characters. Hiragon is interesting because ideally he's the kind of man that Celebrimbor would want to possess. Like Celebrimbor, Hiragon has a massive ego that blinds his better judgment. He initially just wants to save his wife, but then wants to plot an attack of vengeance on Sauron despite the fact that the outcasts are still outnumbered. The game does a good job of showing us just how weak the outcasts are compared to the orcs. The only time we ever see the outcast soldiers is during scripted missions. During the dynamic story, all we see are slaves. This is one of the few instances in which the dynamic story and the scripted story actually manage to work together. Unfortunately, we don't get to see much of Hiragon's egotistic character in gameplay. Of course, we won't get to see him brand orcs, but we could see him perhaps take a more selfish approach to the battle when he's working with Talion. Like, perhaps he can prefer to only fight for himself and leave Talion to deal with his own enemies. In the end, Hiragon doesn't end up turning into Celebrimbor, because Talion convinces him that he still has something that Celebrimbor doesn't: followers and a family. This is a fitting end to a story, because it ties into Tolkien's themes of isolation harboring evil. A lot of Tolkien's villains were lonesome, and that also happens to be one of the primary reasons why Talion follows Celebrimbor. He has nobody else to turn to. But Hiragon does. Even the gameplay demonstrates how Hiragon still has people who are willing to fight alongside him, so it makes sense that he doesn't go down the same dark road as Talion and Celebrimbor. Speaking of darkness, Ratbag is hilarious. I didn't think it was possible to make an orc into a comic relief character, but somehow Monolith manages to pull it off. He provides some much needed humor in a fairly dark game. However, before Talion departs for the Sea of Nirnin, Ratbag is killed off. Some people may be disappointed by this because they may have wanted Ratbag and Talion to become friends. However, I think one of the best things about Ratbag is that Monolith managed to make him likable without making him into Talion's friend. However, there's still a good reason why Monolith had Ratbag killed. It's because he no longer served any purpose in the story. When Talion goes to the Sea of Nirnin, he obtains the ability to brand. That allows him to build up his own orc army. How does Ratbag fit into all this? Ratbag is really weak. This isn't just in stats, but in gameplay as well.
Get the ranger, not me! He's a much easier target! His sword's breaking!
That's about as useful as Ratbag gets in battle. It's true he just stands around and does nothing, but that's all he's supposed to do. It makes no sense for anyone to want to include Ratbag in their army, unless they just want someone to laugh at, so I can really see why Monolith had him killed off. Despite all these mechanically expressed characters, there are two major characters that basically aren't expressed at all mechanically. Golem, and Queen Marwen. They appeared in scripted sequences, especially cutscenes. In game design, cutscenes are looked down upon because they take away from the interactivity of a game. Having characters only appear in cutscenes is usually a poor way of expressing video game characters. However, game designers can sometimes use the lack of interactivity to make a point about their characters. For example, both Golem and Queen Marwen have lost their free will and lost any choice they can make. Being cutscene characters helps the player feel what kind of characters they are, because cutscene characters don't have any free will and don't get to make any choice as well. However, not all the cutscene decisions that Monolith makes seem to be the best. Litharia's portrayal doesn't seem to be supported by being confined mainly to cutscenes. She's supposed to be the strong female leader, but we don't really see this outside of cutscenes. The only time we interact with her mechanically is when we're rescuing her weak and wounded body from an ore camp. Even if we got to fight alongside her once, it could have helped give a better feel of what a strong person she's supposed to be. In the end, Lithariel wants Talion to join her people, but Talion refuses. His refusal to move on with his life represents how Talion is slowly losing himself to the evil harbored by isolation. However, not all characters are seduced by evil. Like Talion, Torvin has also lost his family, but unlike Talion, he hasn't allowed the loss to darken his heart. He's still an optimistic guy and still considers the hunt to be his mistress. Unlike Talion, Torvin is actually ready to move on with his life. This is evidenced by how he makes smart-aleck comments with Talion. According to the artifacts, that's how Torvin's late brother used to talk to him. Torvin is ready to accept Talion as his lifelong training partner and replacement for his brother, but in the end, Talion even refuses him. What's great about Torvin's mission is that Talion's refusal of having a future with Torvin is shown through the gameplay just as much as it is through the cutscenes. During his training, Torvin is always telling Talion about the hunt and how he's supposed to respect it. He really wants Talion to master these principles before he takes him to the grog. However, Talion cheats. He burns a Caragor to ride it instead of making a Caragor submit so he can ride it. He doesn't play fair and square against the beast like a real hunter would. That's how Talion is able to do impossible things like ride a grog. He pretty much breaks the rules of the hunt. He does all of this to further his quest for vengeance against the Black Hand. That's why you see Talion remain quiet about his branding abilities with Torvin. He knows that he's cheating, and he doesn't want Torvin to find out. The game ends with Talion having flaming orange eyes, the same eyes as Sauron. That probably means he has been possessed by Sauron. Exactly how is unclear, but it fits in thematically with the game. The game is about Talion's fall into darkness, so it makes sense for it to end with Talion becoming enslaved to Sauron. It's true that neither Talion nor Celebrimbor see themselves falling into darkness, but even this is consistent with Tolkien's theme. Sauron didn't know how dark he really was, and like Sauron, Talion and Celebrimbor don't realize how dark they really are becoming. Anyway, that'll be the end of this review, everyone. Thank you for watching. Next narrative mechanics will be on Dragon Age Inquisition. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.